Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show here on the Delta Report. This is going to be a scary show. Not scary in the sense I'm going to talk about anything like monsters or anything like that. It's going to be really scary because the things I'm going to talk about are real. And they're really happening. You've all heard that the Fed's caught in a trap. Well, what we're going to do in this show is we already know that this has to end either by deflation or by inflation. And an awful lot of economists out there believe that it's going to end by deflation. I'm going to explore the argument. I'm going to talk about what would happen if it does end in deflation. And I'm going to kind of blow them away why it can't be deflation, why it has to be inflation, by talking about what would happen if a uncontrolled deflation were to happen. And I'm going to tell you guys what, there is a danger that this could get away from the Fed. Even though they can print tremendous amounts of money, there is a danger it could get away from them in the speed that it moves through the system. Because this is a computer age. And after all, math, that's what computers do best is math. And the system is basically a derivatives explosion. Derivatives exploded on the scene. They've been called a weapon of mass financial destruction, but they would also have extenuating things that would extenuate out from that, radiate out from that, in what we refer to as a meltdown. There's $2 quadrillion worth of derivatives products out there. That's 1,000 trillion. That's all basically, if it melted down even to the nominal value, it would completely and utterly destroy the financial system. The derivatives. That's just the derivatives. That's not all the leverage. That actually is leverage. It's part of the leverage, but it's only part of the leverage that's out there within the financial system. Everything in the world runs on money. So what we're going to explore right now is what would happen. We know it's going to go one of these two ways, either deflation or inflation. We're going to explore why inflation is most likely, and then we're going to talk about what would happen with if it goes deflation, all the way deflation, and the system melts down, or if it goes inflation. And why we're doing this tonight is, I hear too many of these guys out there who think that this is all going to deflate, and it's going to deflate soon, and we're going to go into the greatest depression the world has ever seen. And I'm going to try to explain now why that's not so likely to happen. Okay, so first we're going to start with trying to explain the deflation argument away. We're going to debunk it, basically. Because basically I'm tired of hearing it. Oh, the system's going to completely deflate. The whole thing's going to go into a new Great Depression. I'm tired of hearing this. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to take it step by step and we're going to analyze it. What would happen if it deflated? I mean, not just a market correction or anything like that, but an all-out, full-blast crash. Well, it's like I said. There's so much leverage within the system. There's so many companies that are already bankrupt, including the United States government themselves basically is bankrupt. All those treasury bonds aren't worth anything because the United States government is bankrupt. They're too deep in debt. They're deep past the point where they can never get out. Picture a man with credit cards, Say he's went from one credit card to the next, running it up to the limit, using those credit cards to pay off his old credit card debts. And he finally hits a point where it's basically endgame because he's got too much debt. This is what's happened to the United States government now at this point. Too deep in debt. Yeah, sure, they can print more. But that's just inflating the hyper bubble that already exists and making the dollar even more valueless. The other side of that coin is when the whole thing starts to deflate. Now, there's a difference between deflation and inflation. Deflation moves extremely fast. Inflation moves fast, but not like deflation. Bubbles take a long time to grow. They grow slowly. But when they pop fast. Bang! Pop, 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 gone. That's deflation. So, how would deflation look? Well, it would start with the market starting to fall because of actions that the Feds took. That's how it would all start. The Fed becomes too stringent on their monetary policy, trying to chase after inflation, trying to stop it. And what they do is they trip the system into a bearish sentiment all the way across the board. So that there is no bullish sentiment out there anywhere. It's just everybody's a bear then at that point. And the best way to have that change, that sea change between everybody is bullish and everybody's bearish, is to have a long, drawn out bull market that's exceeded the limitations of where we thought we could go on price of everything. Bubbles. Bubbles lead to bullish action switching to bearish action overnight. And that's why deflation is fast. So what happens? Well, everything starts to fall in the initial stages of it because of something the Fed did. Being too bearish. And that fall goes faster and faster, and it starts to get out of control, the Fed. This is what would happen with the deflationary scenario. And the markets would start to fall faster and faster, and the Fed would stay back, and all of a sudden it would hit a point at maybe 30 to 40% down. Moving faster down that they have to actually shut things down. They have to shut off the market. Panic would spread through the financial system. And this would all happen at computer speed because these transactions of you're broke, basically, the computer would say to a company, well, you're broke. And then what happens is they call that contagion. When another company is so dependent on that company with monetary ties through the system, especially in the derivatives products and things like that, everything starts to pop. All the circuit breakers start to go off. That company goes broke, and he might be connected to a couple other companies. Then they go broke, and then in turn there's other companies connected to them, and there's other banks connected to them, and then another bank starts to go bankrupt, and then the whole thing just starts to spiral out of control suddenly. This is called a meltdown. It's something similar to if you got an electrical system, you know. Maybe you got a car that's got a faulty electrical system or something. I mean, I had this happen with a car. I had a big V8. It was a 1978. It was a big V8 engine in it and everything. And something happened with the wiring inside the car. It made ground. The hot leads off the engine. And the wiring harness started to light on fire. And it was up and behind the dash and stuff, and that nearly burnt my car down. Quite seriously. I disconnected the battery, and I had a very difficult time putting the fire out. I think I had baking soda. And I was able to put it out. Quick thinking. But I had a burnout wiring harness. But that's a meltdown. That's what a meltdown is. Everything's fine. All the wires got coating on them. But one wire's the coating's bare or something. So that's one company within the system, maybe like Evergrande, triggers another company. And then that triggers another company within China. And then that could spread at the same time because the Fed has suddenly gone into a stupid tightening cycle. And it could melt down through the system. And it moves at tremendous speed. So what we're discussing tonight is what would that entirely look like if the system completely melted down to a deflation? Or if the Fed stood back when the market started to fall and they let it go just a little bit too far and it causes a contagion of bankruptcy. and the derivatives start to pop off, and the whole thing starts to melt down. And this is why it's difficult for this to happen. I'm going to explain to you why this is, later I'll explain to you why this is difficult for this to happen. It's very unlikely that this will happen. But we got to discuss it, because there is a small, very small, size of a grain of sand possibility that this could happen. A meltdown, and would get away from them, and it would be unrepairable. So basically, because all money is created from debt, what we call money, or credits. So basically, picture this big mound of credits. This is the monetary system. Now, this is what we call money. Your dollar's in your pocket right now, or in your bank account, what you use to pay debit or whatever. This is credits. Picture those as credits, a big mountain of them, created by the Fed. But attached to each one of those credits is debt. They create those credits, never paying the interest, going all the way back to when this game started. They never created that money to pay the interest. So that's why the debt grows larger and larger. The debt is actually so large now that it's bigger than the money supply, or the amount of credits. So you got your credits on one side, picture a scale. You know those old-fashioned scales? So you got all the credits in the world are on one side of the scale. And all the debt in the world's on the other side of the scale. The side of the scale that's debt is much, much larger than the side of the scale that's credits. So what would happen is, in a meltdown, it's basically like it's an instantaneous of paying everything back. So all that credits that are on one side of the scale gets suddenly transferred to the other side of the scale. Now, some of the debt's been paid off because it's so enormous, it's so much bigger than the amount of credits. All the credits are gone. That's a deflationary, so everyone's bankrupt. They're already bankrupt. Right now they're bankrupt. But they're being extended credit, and it's that credit that's the money that's floating around the system. Now, just all disappear. Poof, gone. Well, you're thinking to yourself, Glenn, if that could actually happen, shouldn't I have some dollars in my pocket? I'm going to explain to you why that wouldn't work either. So I'm talking about physical dollars. I'm talking about cash. I'm going to explain to you why that wouldn't work either in a deflation like that. If all the money disappeared from the system, because it's all credit, and if it all has to be paid back, it all just goes poof. The banks, you say, well, I got money in the bank. I've got my FDIC insured money in the bank. What about that? That's real. That's not going to disappear. You wake up and the bank's closed. Because you're going to find that money had counterparty risk associated with the bank. And the bank's already written it into the rules. That money's not even yours. Belongs to the bank. Sorry. Belongs to the bank. They can take any little bit amount of it they want. What's called a bail-in. Or they can take it all. So you say, how do you get out of this? What would happen? Well, we're getting there. We're working there. It's going to take a little bit of time to explain this to you guys. So we got a situation. Let's say we're there to the situation where all the money, everybody in the world is basically bankrupt because they're already bankrupt. But now it's official. Because it's been triggered, the system has melted down, and all of the debts have been tried to be paid off, but they couldn't pay them all. There's still more debt than there is money, and all the credits are basically gone. So we're in that situation now. And everything would just basically lock up and freeze because nobody's going to open up anything if they can't extend credit through the system. And everybody is bankrupt, basically. And I mean, you might be laughing right now and saying, well, how can everybody be bankrupt? Well, that's what a meltdown would do, a deflationary meltdown would do. It basically, the system has to mark everything off what's called mark to market. And basically, to explain to you guys what that means is, right now we have what's called overvaluations on almost everything. Just like the Chinese real estate market was had overvaluations. There's over-evaluations on everything. Just go to your local shopping mall or whatever. The guy says, well, my store is worth $5 million because the bank come in and they did inventory and stuff and they said it's worth $5 million. Yeah, but what's it really worth if you have to sell it in a forced liquidation to pay off debts? Because that's what would happen, is the debts will go through the entire system and basically wipe everyone out. Because what people think they have and what they think things are worth aren't really worth what they think they're worth. It's basically an extinguishment of the credit within the system. It's a meltdown, a deflationary meltdown. And when would this happen is when we pass 40%. So everything's falling. The markets are falling. And people think their net worth is great. Suddenly, they've lost 40% of their net worth. Companies, businesses, corporations, everybody's lost 40% of their net worth on these overvalued investments that they've made. And the derivatives market starts to blow off then. It basically bankrupts everybody. Who can afford these big companies and corporations and stuff out there? Which one of them can afford to suddenly lose 40% of their valuations? And then when it suddenly drops from 40% to 60%, because the ones that lost 40% now are selling off everything and liquidating it at mark to market, which means they have to get whatever they can get. Because suddenly their creditors are coming and they said, hey, pay up. Well, what am I going to pay up? Well, sell your Lamborghini. See, this has already been happening to these big corporations in China like Evergrande. They're already marking the market. Come up with the money. We need the money now. Come up with the money. Pay up. You owe us $300 billion. Well, we can't. Well, payments due $250 million or whatever. We want it now. Sell your Lambo. Sell your whatever you can get. And there's no buyers out there. They got a sudden sale. Whenever you had to make a sudden sale on anything, I know you might put real estate on the market and sits there for 6 months and finally you get your asking price or maybe a little bit more. And in fact, a hot real estate market like what we've been through with such a huge extension of credit that we've seen in the system, things can sell overnight. But when it's a forced liquidation, when all of a sudden everybody's going bankrupt and the system's deflating, nobody has any money, suddenly everybody's only willing to pay a penny on the dollar. And what everybody thought everything was worth, and the valuations, and they took out all these loans and everything on the estimated valuation of everything, now have to go mark to market. Poof! This is the system deflating. So it gets down to a certain point when the system's deflating at around 40% down, where it basically locks everything up. And now the ones in charge, they have a problem. They have to free everything up. But how do you do that without creating more credit? Well, for the sake of this argument, we're going to say that they're still scared of inflation, so they decide not to bail everybody out. Well, then everything's just going to stay locked up. And when I say, and deflate even further, when I say everything's locked up, the banks would all be locked up. Well, you've heard about this thing about the banks having a bank holiday. That's what we would have, a bank holiday. The banks would have their doors shut. All of them. Well, suddenly, all these companies and things out there, trucking firms and everything else, they can't even make payroll. Because the bank's closed up. The bank's not extending credit anymore either. The whole system runs on credit. Suddenly, in this deflationary scenario, we've got the world not functioning at all. Even your power companies to keep the grid up. They're not going to work if the banks are closed and they can't get credit. They can't send their employees out to fix the phone lines or anything. So what happens? Well, the next step in all this is your cell phone goes dead. Your power turns off. The system shuts down. Now, what? Now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. The system actually starts to shut down because the money is corrupted and it's all just deflated in an absolute, not like 1929. This would be This would be far beyond that. This would be light years beyond 1929. Because credit is extended so much further into every part and every nook and cranny of the system. And the derivatives products. Oh, the derivatives products. $2 quadrillion, 1,000 trillion of them. Pop, 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 like fuses going off in an electrical box where it's shorting out. This is the problem. It's like an electrical short. So, the next step is, and this is the reason why they will not allow this to happen, is, say they do get down 40% or something, maybe 50%, I don't know, along in there, somewhere around 40%, 50%. And the system freezes up like that. Credit is frozen with the banks and everything else. Do you really believe that they're going to let it move to the next step? They know that it's shutting the system down at that point. Do you really believe that they're going to let it go down 50, 60% and they're going to try to open markets up or whatever with the system in that kind of condition? That's what's going to create a panic situation for the ones in charge. And I'll tell you why they're going to panic. Is because they're like a horde of ticks. You know, woods ticks, dog ticks. You get them in the woods, you know, they're on you. Picture a horde of them on you, maybe 100 of them, and they've been feeding off of you for, say, years. And they're juicy and fat because they've been feeding for a long time. Okay? This is what the bloodsuckers within the system are like. It's a system that keeps them alive. What is the system? It's all of us. We work every day and everything else. This is what they feed off of in order to survive. All of these intellectuals that are running the system, all of these lawyers and all the people that are in charge running the system, they've been feeding off of the system, sucking its juices. This system supports them. It keeps them in their positions of power. If you get the crisis where the system is locked up, say the markets all fall by 40%. The system's now locked up because the banks do not want to extend credit, and there's too many bankruptcies already within the system, and the contagion is spread, and the derivatives are starting to go off and everything else. And so these ones in charge are going to stop everything. They're going to lock it up because they don't want it to fall further because they know that the system is melting down. See, we almost got there in 2008. They were 2 hours away from stopping the system. In other words, stopping the financial system, locking credit, and freezing the system. And why they freeze the system? It's a fail-safe. It's a safeguard against the meltdown. This is why they freeze the system. And they do not freeze the system unless it's a life-threatening situation to the system. If you looked at the system like a person, it would be a life-threatening situation. So they lock the system down. And when they get the system locked down, it doesn't function anymore until they can fix it. And you really believe, because the system supports all of them, and if they realize that the system was undergoing a meltdown, they would be these ones in charge, because they've been feeding off the system all this time, they would be so frightened at that moment that they would be like somebody who's humbled himself and he says, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. Just please don't let this be real. That's a situation and a consensus that will go among all of the people on earth that are in charge of the financial system. And do you really believe that they would just stand there? Now the system's locked up. This is what we're talking about right now. The system has been locked up because of a deflationary event that has occurred, a meltdown like 2008, only worse, and all credit's been frozen in the system. That's where we're at right now. And it's frightened the ones in charge to the point where they're weak in the knees. They might be almost losing control of their bladders. They're so frightened. Do you really believe that they're just going to stand there and say, oh, well, we've locked the system down. Let's just continue to let it melt completely, and we will fight our way to survival in the new world that's going to be something like the Mad Max movies. You think they're going to take that route and say, well, we're not going to do anything because we're just going to let it go Mad Max? Or do you think they're going to say, well, what do we got to do? The system's locked down now. We got a period of time. We got to get back up and running again. They'd all converge in meetings and everything in order to make contingency plans while the system's locked down. They'd be in a hurry to do it too. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And they'd sit in round tables or whatever. Let's see, who all went bankrupt? They'd list all the banks that are bankrupt. How many companies are bankrupt right now? And how many derivatives products have failed to procure or whatever? They'd just go through and they'd list all the things that's wrong. They'd make a big long list, and maybe it'd be as long as Santa Claus lists from all the kids on Earth. That might be how big their list is of everything that went bankrupt. Well, we got to fix it. We got to fix it. They'd sit around the table. Well, one of them might put up their hand and they'll say, how do you propose that we fix this? And they say, well, we're going to have to make everybody whole again. Well, what's that going to take? And they'd sit there and they'd type on the keyboard and adding on their calculator. It's got so many zeros, I can't tell how many. It's going on to infinity with zeros. It's going to take the baler. Well, we got to do it. Otherwise, we're the ticks. And this bodies that we've been sucking on all this time is going to die if we don't do it. And then what's going to happen to all of us rich people, all of us politicians, all of us people in charge of the financial system? What's going to happen to all of us if we let this body die? And then they'd all get frightened again. Well, we'll do it, whatever it is. Whatever it takes. Let's get the system up and running again. Just do it. Well, what's it going to take? Well, we're going to have to create a whole bunch of more monetary units, of course. It's the only thing we really know how to do. And it's the only thing that'll work. Well, we're forced into a corner here. It's either let the system die and all of us take our chances with Master Blaster, or bail it all out. Okay, let's bail it all out. They bail it all out again. But what happens then? Now we've just made a sudden shift. We're not deflating anymore. They open the system back up from the freeze credit. They've poured all new money in. They've opened up new lines of credit, new repo facilities, whatever, permanent repo facilities, as much as you want. Quantitative easing, as much as you want. More than ever before. Brighter, bigger, better, or whatever. And we're bailing out all these companies and we're bailing out all these banks. And we're just going to fix it. And so they fix it. Then what's going to happen to your dollar? Then what's going to happen to Bitcoin, gold, silver, and everything else? It's going to go way up. But they're going to have to fix it. Because let's just explore a little the deflation. Just want to stay for a minute more. What would happen if the deflation just continues and continues to its final conclusion and they don't fix it? Say they don't fix it. Say they were to say, well, it's just too much. We can't print all that money. So we're just going to let her continue to melt down. And I know the system's frozen, but unlock it and let's see what happens to the markets. So they unlock it and the markets fall 5,000 points in the first 5 minutes. Lock it again. Lock it up again. Too late. All the money's gone. All the credits are gone from the system. They've extinguished themselves now. Now what? Well, it's bankrupt. Even the U.S. Treasury would be bankrupt at that point. Because the debt's grown so large, it exceeds the money supply. By much, 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 much. And I'm sorry to say this, but if they let that happen, money is what runs everything in the system. If they didn't fix it, if they decided just to let it go like that, everything would just stop because nobody's going to work unless they get paid. And if all the money's gone, they can't get paid. So then you're talking about your cash. So you've said, okay, I see this coming. I'm going to keep some cash. Well, sorry, the issuers of your cash are now bankrupt. And, it's just like anything. It's like when the Confederacy went down. I mean, their money wasn't worth anything then. The money's only worth something. The cash is only worth something if your corporation that prints that cash is bankrupt. It ain't worth nothing. The only thing that'd be worth something then would be gold and silver, but that wouldn't be even worth much. Why? Is because in a deflationary event like that, the only thing that's going to be worth something is things that are going to help you get along to survive, which would be food and stuff. And the thing about those is, in a situation where we're talking about a Mad Max world, you would have to be able to protect them because everybody else is going to want them. And they are the only barterable goods because you can't eat a piece of gold. Everything would just basically melt down into chaos. And this is another reason why this is not going to happen, is because they're not going to sit idly by and let the system that they have been sucking on die. Completely die. And that's what deflation would do. It would completely and utterly destroy the system. It's just how far are they going to let this deflation go before they turn this around? Because they can't let it go to a complete meltdown because nothing would function then. The system would die. At some point, because the system is what supports them, they are going to turn on their heel. But the big question mark is, when are they going to do that? When are they going to come back and print more money? Because that's when we're going to start spiraling out of control toward the inflationary side. So now we're going to talk about the inflation. And this is possibly one of my longest talks I've ever said. But why we're going to talk about the inflation is because this is probably what's really going to happen. Now, we were talking theoretically about the deflation, and I said there is a very small remote chance that it could happen. But now we're going to talk about the inflation. And the inflation is a very high probability that's going to happen. And this is what it's going to look like. In other words, what I'm saying is this is what's most likely to really happen. The Fed's going to keep playing this little game they're playing until things start to get tough. Maybe 3 months from now, whatever. Starts to get tough. And then what happens is they have to relent because they see the system starting to melt down. Because they've already told you they're data dependent. And so they're just basically going to pull their horns in. And they're going to set things back to the way they were. Okay? By printing more money. So we're going to start to head toward inflation then. But it's going to be a slow process at first because we are not even really... I could kind of say we're in the acceleration phase of a hyperinflation now, but not really. We're not quite there yet. We're close, very close. Maybe we could say we're there, and have been for a little while, but because inflation's almost assured at this point, but we're not really there. We're running around. They say around 7%. We're really probably running around 15%, but I mean, you probably have to get up to 50 or 100% before you're in the acceleration phase that leads into a hyperinflation by technical terms. I think that's about what it is, something like about. Anyway, it's pretty high before you really start to move toward the hyperinflation. But we're going to get there. And we will get there after they repair the damage that they do. So now we're moving toward inflation. Now, picture we're in the future. Say we're later this year, later 2022, maybe fall time, and the inflation rate is increased to, say, 40%, 50%, and accelerating really fast because they've printed a whole bunch of new money. They've billed everybody out that they need to bill, and they've moved the markets back up. The markets are back up to where they were. Say they're 36, 37,000, maybe 38,000. They've repaired, in other words, repaired everything then. But our inflation rate is running like nothing we've ever seen before. the people are very upset. What's going to happen then is the inflation's going to continue to accelerate past that. 100%, 500%, 1,000%. It's going to keep right on going. And it's going to hit a point, but it's going to take time. This is going to take time. Bubbles are going to continue to expand, but it's all going to take time. Eventually, we're going to get to a point where the people are having very much problems worldwide feeding themselves because food prices have went so high. You see, the thing is this is going to have an effect on production of food. But, you know, when we're going through the initial first stages of this, when the velocity of money is starting to increase, there's a bit of this is why they call it the crack up boom. There's a little bit of a period there where things start to pick up a little bit. Call it the calm before the storm, when the real serious hyperinflation starts to hit. That's when people have trouble making ends meet. Poverty's everywhere at that point. Well, we're going to move into a stage then that's beyond what we have now. What we have now, I'm going to call it the awakening of the people. Are starting to resent their governments. They're starting to resent everything that the government's been doing. More and more people are starting to fall into that camp. But when the inflation starts to rob the bread right out from their table, right out from their children and stuff, then it starts to go beyond just an awakening. It starts to move to the next stage where the people start to... Now, this is going to be deep into the hyperinflation before this happens. And it might take us a couple years to get there from here. Now, I'm talking in the future, maybe 2-3 years out. So, basically the way we're looking at it is we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. If we have the deflation, we're going to spiral out of control very quickly in the next number of months, and the world is just going to melt down and be done. But the inflation is going to cause something that's going to cause a drastic problems too. But it's going to take longer. It's going to buy us a couple years, 2 or 3 years. But what it's going to look like in the end is the people are going to get squeezed and squeezed until they snap. And that snap would come suddenly toward the end of the hyperinflation, when the wealth transfer starts to occur. And then the world will be reformed. Not in an authoritarian, not in a like the way a lot of people think it's going toward this new, what do they call that, totalitarianism and everything else. No, it's been drifting toward that, but that will snap too when the people snap. Because it's not what the people want. And what all these ones in there in control now, what they want and what the people want are two different things. And the people represent the majority of the population. And they've forgotten that. So, the hyperinflation ultimately will lead to that sudden change that'll create a new financial system, a new world system, and it happened very quickly. And the people will be responsible for it. And I don't personally believe that whatever is established in that new system or new financial system or new world that they generate, don't assume it's going to be a totalitarian type system. It could come out as being one of the freest systems we've seen yet. Because you have to understand that the people would be the motivating force behind the creation of this new system. So it might be something that is, in a way, it might be very controlled because of technology is allowing them to control. But at the same time, you have to understand that it's the only thing that keeps us separate from the animals is a system of justice that's real justice, not phony justice. Not laws that are out of control that perpetuate the wealthy amongst society to continuously keep the poor amongst society in a state of continuous poverty so that they become debt slaves to a small group of oligarchs. This is an unfair system that's been formed from thousands of years of monarchy and thousands of years of dictatorship and thousands of years of people setting up countries and borders and nationalism and everything else. But this is the early stages of development of civilization. The later stages of development of civilization look totally different. But how do we get there? Well, we either get there or we don't. And we don't get there if we fight wars and we are nationalistic and we become more and more less community, and we start withdrawing into this nationalism where we divide sides and take sides and we arm ourselves and then we basically blow up the planet. We don't get there. The establishment that was created through this long process of establishing our civilization is a completely corrupt establishment. And this is why they are making corrupt rules, self-serving rules for themselves to enrich themselves and their family members. And sad to say, this divide between the rich and the poor is growing greater all the time. And it's going to grow greater until it hits that consensus where the people have just basically said, well, we got nothing left to lose. And that's when they lose it. And that's all going to be caused by the currency. Eventually. Now, I mean, they can get there overnight with deflation. They could have us there by March or April. Or they can choose to take the longer route, which is going to take a couple more years, 2 or 3 more years to get there. But either way, this system's going down, guys. And this is why we're preparing, because we see it disintegrating. Month by month by month, things are getting a little bit worse, a little bit worse. And when things finally do start to get a little bit better, a little bit light at the end of the tunnel, it's only going to make the acceleration of the demise of the monetary system more apparent. Because it's math. The monetary system, it's on its way down because it's corrupted. And how it's corrupted is because of the way the money is created in the first place and how it's given value. At its core, it's just paper. And all these countries have said, hey, this paper has value because we say so. Well, we've reached a state of human development now where that's not enough. And they just can't print these currencies to infinity and get away with it. And so it's going to cause a massive upheaval either way. And so it's going to lead to either by deflation or by inflation, it's going to lead ultimately to a diminished population worldwide. But with the deflation, you could possibly be looking at a lot worse situation. Well, a lot less people would survive. The inflation's slower. but it would. I don't think it would be as bad. It's a lesser of the two evils, even though it would lead to a world that's indistinguishable. I mean, a world that's terrible. With burnout cars on the street, sections of the power grid going down, people revolting and everything else. And finally, in the end, a revolution that ultimately leads to a building of a new society, or uh, a new civilization that runs on a completely different monetary system. This is the kind of upheaval we're in for because our money is corrupted. And money runs the entire system. And sometimes I look at money and I say to myself, this is the weirdest stuff there ever was. So see, you got like a bunch of coins in your pocket. That means that you can go in and have a hamburger. But if you don't have those coins, they're going to let you go hungry? What are the coins anyway? Pieces of metal? Somebody's mined out of the ground, whether it's lead, copper, zinc, some sort of alloy, whatever they want to use, and they press it in and they put the head of somebody on there? What weird stuff. So I go into the restaurant and they ain't going to feed me if I don't have some of this metal in my pocket? What's that all about? Money, the very concept of money, see, we don't think about it that way. We're so used to it. It's always been around. When we were little kids, they teach us what money is early on. We never think of it backwards, like, what really is it? It's weird stuff. And it even becomes more weird when you realize that it really doesn't have any value, except assigned value, by people who can't be trusted. And they've been given the key to print all they want. Of course all this is going to end in madness. And we're coming down to that point now. So I told you guys at the beginning of this show it's going to be a scary show. And it's scary because it's real. And it's scary because there's no way out. This is going to end in a situation either way. Let's hope it doesn't go to deflation. I don't think it's going to go to deflation, but even if it inflates and goes the inflation route, it's going to end in a very bad situation that's going to be very difficult to survive through. It's going to take smarts to get through this situation. And it's not out there 10 years from now, 15 years from now. It's coming sooner than that. A lot sooner if it's going to be deflation. Thank you guys for listening to me. If you've listened to me this whole show, listen to me ramble on about this. It's important that you listen to me because you got to prepare yourself mentally. You've got to prepare yourself physically. You've got to make friends with people. You've got to prepare food for yourselves. You've got to prepare water for yourself, because there's going to be a period in time that could, maybe it's 2 years away, maybe it's 6 months away, maybe it's, if we're very lucky, if more than 2 or 3 years from now, if we're very lucky, and if the Fed can walk this tightrope properly. But that's a big if. But it's still going to end badly. No way around that. So anyway, guys. Well, it looks like we've had peak oil, we've had peak this, we've had peak that. Right now, it looks like about 2019 or 2020 was peak people. We've expanded like lemmings. And you know what happens to the lemmings. Catch you guys in the next show, and I wish this show could have been brighter. But, I mean, the world continues to go on, and they will rebuild the world after this is over. And we will have a new monetary system. I'll tell you guys honestly what I think. I think the best monetary system would be no monetary system and no government and no money. Say, well, how would we survive it without money? You know, I don't know, but it'd be better than what we're doing right now. Bye-bye, guys.